What's up, everyone? We are around 24 hours from Game 2 here as we're recording this. We're going to talk about Bucks and the Bulls Game 2. We're also going to talk about an old friend, Boogie Cousins, who has been in the news in the last 24 hours. Interesting stuff to say, including about Milwaukee. We'll talk about Bobby Portis showing up on the injury list as well, and then look ahead, as I said, to what we can expect from the Bucks in Game 2. So let's get started.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Bucks. I'm your host, Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday and after every Bucks playoff game. And also find some of my work over at ESPN. And alongside me, as she is every week, Camille Davis from the Technical Foul podcast, although they are taking a night off tonight, which is very unlike Camille. So she's put in all her energy into Locked On Bucks tonight. And she did tell me that she has some stuff to say. So we'll see where that's what those takes are directed at, or who those takes are directed at in a little bit. But we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of every day, particularly during the playoff run. We're close to 3K subscribers on YouTube as well. So if you just listen on the old-fashioned audio podcast, which is honestly, that's how I do it. I don't listen to myself, but other podcasts. But feel free to jump across on YouTube and help us out there, get us above 3K over the next few days or over the next week. Camille, before we get to the basketball, you had an accident today. You tweeted about it, which means that it's public knowledge, which means that I feel comfortable with bringing it up. What happened?
All right. So picture this. I'm leaving work, right? I'm working downtown. I'm leaving work. I'm feeling good about myself. Like, I made it through the day. I've had a long day, ready to go home. I step off the curb because I was waiting for the walk sign to actually say walk. I was being a good citizen and everything.
Yeah, that's right.
Step off the sidewalk, and it's a pothole that I clearly missed seeing. So the part of my foot that was still on solid ground stayed there, and the part that was in the pothole completely went into the pothole. So like the bone on the outside of your ankle, like touched ground. I almost fell, but I just buckled, kind of had to catch myself a little bit. And now I have a swollen ankle. My knee hurts. Got it propped up right now as we podcast. So the Milwaukee potholes trying to take me out. I wasn't even driving. I was just walking, and it still almost took me out.
So when this happens, now obviously this hurts, but everyone's been here before. Everyone's like tripped or had some sort of unfortunate public incident while just trying to walk. Do you look around and see if anyone's looking? Do you just play it cool? Do you pretend it didn't happen? How did you handle this?
This one, when I buckled, I looked up because I saw someone was crossing with me. So I did look to the side to see if she was also with me, but she wasn't even paying me any attention. So I just had a moment to myself. I didn't look at any other cars. I just kept my gaze straight. So I'll just eat this L and keep walking.
I will say one last thing. The sidewalks or the footpaths, the roads in Milwaukee, everything about it is an absolute danger to society. It is an absolute joke over there. And whether you're walking, running, riding a bike, whatever you're doing, I see people on skateboards and I say, I would not be doing that if I was you. That does not feel like a safe activity in the streets of Milwaukee. So I feel for you, Camille.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
It's a tough situation for you to be in. Speaking of, let's say a situation that I'm not as concerned about, but it is noteworthy. Game 2, 8:30 p.m. Central Time at Fiserv Forum, as we know. But Bobby Portis did surface on the injury report as probable. So you expect that he's probably going to play, but it's a calf contusion. Now, I mentioned this to you before we started recording. You didn't remember it. I'm sure a bunch of our listeners saw it, depending on what broadcast maybe that affected it as well. But certainly I had it on TNT, and certainly on the TNT broadcast, you saw Bobby Portis sort of grabbing his calf. I believe it was in the second quarter, so it was pretty early in the game, and he continued to play it out. So that, to me, told me that it was probably more, as the injury report says, a contusion rather than a strain. If it was a strain, then you would be concerned for what that means moving forward. But you never like to see important role players like this show up on the injury report, but it at least looks like he's probably going to play.
Yeah, I mean, that's the positive news that you would take out of seeing Bobby appear on the injury report. It's just the fact that he's probable. It's not something that seems like it'll be long term. Doesn't seem like this is going to be a Luka Doncic situation where, like you mentioned, it's a strain and we're missing a couple of games here. So Bobby being probable is good, but also makes me think a little bit about the additional depth that we have. In game one, Giannis didn't play as many minutes as he would have because of his foul trouble. So I'm curious if Bud kind of lets off of Bobby a little bit in this upcoming game to give him just a little bit more time to kind of rest. I'm sure they appreciated the extra day in between games. I know some of us fans were kind of like, what? Like, come on, we wish it was a Tuesday game. Like, let's get right back into it. But I'm sure they were happy to have an extra day for Bobby to kind of rehab, get himself right, and just get ready to play. Even in the pictures the Bucks posted earlier today showing the players working out, the picture of Bobby, he had his leg up like he was stretching his calf muscle out. So I was like, well, we're seeing the work in picture form as well outside of just seeing it on the injury report. So overall, I'm glad that he's probable, glad that it just seems like a contusion and not a strain or anything of that sort, because as we know, calves can be tricky. It's something that can linger. So as long as it's not a strain, we're in good shape here.
Yeah, it's a traditional old man injury, the calf strain. Now, Bobby isn't that old, and neither is Luka, by the way, which is concerning for Luka. If you're that young and you're having calf problems, come on, this is like a 30-plus ailment that you need to deal with. You mentioned the depth. The other thing, of course, the extension of Giannis minutes makes sense, but also it is a nice luxury that you've just got Serge Ibaka sitting there on the bench as well that could potentially come on. And it's been interesting over the last sort of few weeks, or really the last month, and seeing some of the interactions that we have with Bucks fans on social media and those types of things. And a lot of people are asking about, Serge Ibaka. And it's like, well, I mean, this is right now with everyone playing. In a perfect world, when you traded for Serge Ibaka, you wouldn't have needed to play him. Like that was the perfect scenario. But in an instance like this, where maybe if Bobby Portis is sore, maybe in the second half the Bucks are winning the game, and you say, okay, well, we're just going to play Serge Ibaka, a veteran who's been there, been in huge moments right throughout his entire career, isn't going to be out of place on the floor. I think it's nice. So I've always thought that with the Serge Ibaka trade, I don't care that he's not playing, because it makes sense why he's not playing. It's like, who are you playing him ahead of? None of those guys, which we will get to a little bit later with DeMarcus Cousins, as I said, a kind of a similar situation. Maybe he wouldn't have been enjoying this too much sitting on the bench there, but we'll get to that. What else are you looking forward to for game 2? We haven't spoke since game 1, Camille, but is there anything that you're still taking away from that game that you're looking forward to this one tomorrow?
Yeah, so game 1 was a rock fight. I just tweeted like it was a very ugly game. Not necessarily enjoyable to watch, especially when you watched how quickly the Bucks took off in the first quarter. But you kind of felt like, oh, this is going to be over quick. Like we get to celebrate throughout the game. It won't be stressful. But one of my favorite phrases about basketball is just that it's a game of runs. So you just need to understand that, okay, you got to run here. Cool. But expect the other team to have one at some point, because it's just a game of runs. And the Bulls went on one, and the Bucks had to dig deep. Shots were not falling, also weren't falling for Chicago. But luckily for the Bucks, the Bulls were already in a hole that they had to try to work themselves out of, in addition to, but where the Bucks, they already had the lead. So when they started struggling, at least they already had a little cushion. Game got a little tight, and then the Bucks had to really lock in. But the biggest takeaway that I have from game 1 is when Giannis is on the court, Chicago really doesn't have much for the Bucks. Like, he is such a mismatch for them in so many different ways. He was amazing outside of the fouls, and I expect for him to clean that up a little bit more. Jrue Holiday's comments about the rust coming from the rest was interesting to me, where I'm like, okay, let's see how that goes going forward. And Jrue has already mentioned before, like, this first game kind of felt like a throwback to last year's playoffs, where it was Giannis kind of steadying the ship, and Chris is struggling a little bit offensively, Jrue struggling a little bit offensively, and you're just waiting for one, because at some point one of them has to pop. Like, you just know it's going to happen at some point. And in this Bulls game, it was Jrue Holiday. Had a big fourth quarter for us. It was enjoyable to see how they closed the game out. Stressful at times throughout it, because it felt like it shouldn't have been as close as it was at some points, but that's basketball. I did not expect for this to be a series of blowouts. Hopefully we get one or two in there just to get that 2015, revenge from game 6. But it's what I would expect it to a certain degree. And One thing that did shock me, though, was the level of defense that Chicago Bulls were playing. I did not expect them to clamp up as much as they did. Caruso looked absolutely amazing out there, but given how poorly we shot, I mean, they also shot poorly. But if I had to pick one of the big threes to have some more faith in, given some of the struggles we've seen Chicago have, I would lean towards the Bucks, because I just feel like our guys can get buckets in a few more different ways consistently than Chicago can. We saw what was happening with DeRozan throughout game one, where he's kind of forcing up his shots, even tough looks. And the only person that we have on the tough shot express over on our side is Chris Middleton there. So we'll love to see Chris get some easier looks. Defense was pretty good. Keep that up. And I just don't see Chris and Drew playing that poorly consistently. But what I can see happening is Brook and Giannis being able to contribute at the level that they have consistently going forward.
Yeah, it does feel like shot quality outside of threes. Both teams get a bunch of open threes in this game one, but shot quality inside the perimeter feels like it's heavily in the favor of the Bucks, because they do have really just the size mismatch there as well. Now, I will say this, there would have been some fans outside the arena the other night. There's probably going to be fans, particularly moving forward. And talking to some people in Milwaukee, apparently it was snowing again yesterday. But yes, the good news is, Camille, that summer is coming. Warm weather is on the way, which means when it's sunny, you need sunglasses, which means you need to go to talk to our friends at Shady Rays, which is an independent sunglass company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' Insane Protection Program, which includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They'll send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. If you're walking down the street, you step in a pothole, your glasses fall off, and then you stand on them. Talk to our friends at Shady Rays, and they will get you a new pair. And also, if you don't love them, you'll pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays. Exclusively for our listeners, head to shadyrays.com. Use the code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's locked on for the best deal of the season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses. And by the way, Shady Rays backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. We'll get to Boogie Cousins. Just to wrap up your point, though, Camille, and sort of talking about where the Bucks have advantages in this game. The one thing that I will say, and this has been something that people have screamed for in the past, and the easiest example I can come up with is last year against Brooklyn, where James Harden had the hamstring issues, and everyone's like, why don't you just isolate James Harden? Why don't you attack James Harden? He's injured. He can't move. The Bucks didn't necessarily do it, and they've never really been a team that I would say has hunted mismatches or hunted advantages, but they do seem very, very aware of the size dominance in this matchup and the amount of times. And that's why some of the passes that I think they were trying to make in game one were just absolutely absurd. I'm like, what are you trying to do? And even some of the passes that worked, I think it's a dangerous game, and I don't think it helps Giannis with some of those passes where they'll just throw it up in the air and say, just catch the ball. Most of the times he can catch it, but there was also a couple of times where he very clearly pushed the defender to catch the ball. And I was like, oh my God, that's the most obvious foul. And they didn't blow it. They didn't call it. So I just think, look after you. Go for the mismatch. And they're very aware that they have the size mismatch, but just that you don't need to force it. I think this team can get whatever shot they want without needing to force that stuff inside, which I thought they did a little bit too much in game one, which contributed heavily to the 21 turnovers. You would like to think that you can almost cut that in half in game two, and there alone, you're going to be in a better spot.
Could not agree more with that, especially talking about trying to force situations, because, I mean, I did hear the Bulls fans who were talking about the over the back call that was not called. And when I saw Giannis do it, I was like, why would you do that in this situation? Like, you have 5 fouls. I thought it was a foul. So when they didn't blow it, I was like, okay, we caught one here. Great. But understand, like, because you got, lucky on that one call does not mean that's going to be something that's going to be called consistently. Because as we've seen, refs can kind of change what they're calling as the game continues to go on. So I just hope in game two and going forward, just some of the detail things, just kind of cleaning up that sloppiness in that sense. Like you mentioned, having to push off a situation. So if that's what he has to do because that's how tight the defense is, maybe let's put him in better positions where he doesn't need to have to do that. Let's get some better looks, some better entry passes. If it's not there, maybe pass the ball around, try to do something else, different action. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like, let's not force anything because that can definitely come back to bite you in the butt. And we don't need that. We got to get out. Like, we have a plan here, 15 more wins to go. If you're trying to get those next 15, then you have to be disciplined. And that's something I've been saying throughout the regular season. I can't stand when we're undisciplined, when we do things where it's like, this is a error that's between the ears here. Like, let's clean this up. Like, you see what's happening. So yeah, I agree with your point there.
And of course, the other obvious mismatch, we always think about Giannis, and as you pointed to at the start, Camille, just going by plus minus, and we've had plenty of people in the YouTube comments point that out as well. Just play him more. Like I said on yesterday's show, Drew and Chris played 39 minutes, so I got no doubt Bud will play him those minutes. But the foul trouble, irrespective of the last minute, where I think we all would have liked to have seen him on the floor, but if he wasn't in foul trouble, then he would have played those higher minutes. So I'm not worried about that. But Brook Lopez played 32 minutes himself, which is on the high end for him, really throughout his entire time with Milwaukee. Anytime you see Brook Lopez over 30 minutes, you generally know that it's a series that the Bucks feel like they can play him, and a series that they feel like he's having a real impact. Obviously, it's been amazing to me to see how quickly he has looked like Brook Lopez since coming back. But as well as Giannis, he looms as a guy that can get you 20 points a night with ease in this series. And it's not just the way that we've seen him score a lot in the regular season since he's come to Milwaukee shooting the threes, but in the postseason, we saw it last year, his ability to score inside is only magnified in the postseason, and perhaps particularly against this matchup. If you're going to put Vooch on him, I don't think he's too concerned about it.
No, not at all. And it was times where, like, the other way around, where Vooch is trying to back Brook down, and I'm like, go ahead and try that out for you. Go ahead and try that on for size, and let's see what happens there. But yeah, Brook Lopez is a luxury to have. Like, we all have been applauding him defensively, especially this year, because we all know there were conversations last season. People think we should trade Brook Lopez and he's going to get played off the floor and it won't work. And then the playoffs happen and you see how valuable it is to have somebody like Brook, because not only does he help facilitate the defense there by being that man in the middle, being their quarterback defensively, but offensively, he also opens up so much, because I think a lot of Bucks fans still kind of think of Brook as that 3-point shooter above the break, coming down, late on the fast break, setting up. Brooklyn Brook. Like, Brook, there's a reason that on this team they mentioned Brooklyn Brook. Like, he was a bucket in the post. Like, he's the leading scorer in Brooklyn Nets history, like, because he gets buckets in that way. So knowing that he can do that, although the Bucks ask, hey, we want you to spot up a little bit more often. So, like, he's versatile. He can get you those threes if they're open. He can also get you points in the paint. The only thing with Brook offensively that kind of makes me shake my head sometimes is sometimes he just takes very difficult shots for no reason. Like, why are you falling right now to the side? Like, you could have just did a little hook shot right here. But those moments aside, having Brook is a luxury to have. And when you see him and Giannis continuously beating people up inside, like, it's some bully ball there, and I love to see it.
Yeah, and go back and go on YouTube or whatever, and as you just pointed to, and watch him in Brooklyn, and the tough, flippy, whatever you want to call them, shots. He's been doing that his whole life, and going back to a couple of the and ones he had, particularly the first one that he had, which was sort of not quite as far out as the free throw line, but it was in the lane there. It wasn't in the restricted area, let's say. And yeah, he just kind of flipped it up, gets the and one, and it goes down. I mean, he does make those shots, but you're right. When he's missing them, it's like, I don't know if that's the shot you need to take, particularly some of the threes. I know Frank's referenced it before, but sometimes he'll pump fake and it's like, do you really just want this guy like closer to you? And because he's still going to shoot it, because he's still big enough to do it. But it's like, why didn't you just take the first one? It seems like it was an easier shot. But he has been over, even going back to the Eastern Conference Finals run in 2019, he's been one of the more reliable shooters and one of the more reliable offensive players for the Bucks through even series that didn't go all that well. I'll tell you what else is reliable for my hunger, and that's Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar that's ever been made, and the perfect playoff snack, in my opinion. So go to built.com and check out all the flavors that they've got for you that you can have at home if you're having a little a watch party perhaps at home, Camille, then a Built Bar will do the trick for you. And as we know, they've got a ridiculous amount of different flavors there with the cinnamon, the almond, the marshmallow flavors ones that they've got there as well, the cookies and cream. Everything is there for you. And the good news is that they're healthy for you as well, which isn't always the case if you're talking about snacks you're eating during a basketball game. So this will be good for you. You'll feel good. The Bucks will win, and it'll be a good night all around. So go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Let's talk DeMarcus Cousins, Camille. So he obviously had a short period with the Milwaukee Bucks and was relatively productive in his time there. Certainly the numbers in the advance, the on-off stuff was favorable. It wasn't bad, even though the Bucks were certainly struggling through that period of the season. But he was cut. I don't think anyone was really surprised that he was cut. A few weeks later, the Bucks made a trade for Serge Ibaka, who we mentioned obviously earlier in the show. But DeMarcus Cousins did this story with Mark Spears, who, it used to be the undefeated, but I guess they've changed the name now.
Anscape.
There we go, Anscape. So you can check it out there, the full story. But essentially, he didn't hold back. And DeMarcus Cousins has never been someone that's held back, but he basically said that he was disappointed with the way his situation in Milwaukee was handled. He thought that he was playing a role. He was healthy. He was doing this. He's been productive. The Bucks mentioned potentially long-term stuff with him when they signed him. I don't understand, to me, what value there is for DeMarcus Cousins to come out in the middle of a playoff series that he's in with his new team and slander the Bucks. Like, I don't think it's a good look for him. And I think at this point in his career, based on the injuries, based on his limitations, which we all saw when he was with Milwaukee, I thought he played fine, but he's not even close to the same guy. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me for him to come out. I mean, this is the NBA. Guys get cut all the time. And he's at a point in his career, and we've seen a number of players do that. He used to be a star. He used to be a perennial all-star. He could get you 20 and 10. He can't do that night in, night out anymore. He's just a guy in the league, and he doesn't have a great reputation. So I don't think that it's a given that he could walk into the defending champs and expect that he's just going to walk in and get minutes and get a long-term contract. It was just a bizarre timing for me.
The timing thing I can definitely see, especially the timing really doesn't work out when you see that he was on the sidelines arguing with, I think it was Will Barton during their last loss. But so the Boogie thing, when he got cut initially, I wasn't shocked that he got cut because I was kind of already thinking it through, and I'm like, okay, I don't think he'll have a role in the playoffs. He's really, really slow-footed. And he fouls a lot. So I was like, okay, like he's given us spot minutes because we needed a big body at that time. Right. And I was pleased with him while he was here. I enjoyed him here. It seemed like he was happy being in Milwaukee. What shocked me was the timing of when he got cut, because the news dropped like as soon as that game ended. I was like, he must still be in the locker room. Like now he's getting cut. And to see Boogie come out and say like, no, yeah, like it was like that. Like I'm in the locker room, still full jersey, and they're telling me I'm out the door. That was disappointing to see that that's the way it went down, because we always hear how it's a business. But when you also hear companies saying like, it's a family atmosphere and we like to treat people a certain way, to hear that they didn't necessarily follow that code of ethics that they said they're, striving to achieve. It's disappointing. As a Bucks fan, I was disappointed to hear that that's how he got treated, especially when he, rebelled like, hey, I was between Milwaukee and Denver. Denver didn't have a spot at the time. Milwaukee was saying the thing can be a long-term fit and this and that. And really, like I call it selling him a dream a little bit to a certain degree, where it's like, this is the role we see for you. And when it came time to double up, they just were like, you know what, actually, not all that interested. We're going to go a different direction. So I can see why that hurts. And the timing of it definitely is a little strange. But in an interview, I think it was with Mark. Was it with Mark Spear? Yeah. In an interview like that, where you're going to be just talking about different subjects, I can see how it comes up. If that was the focus of the article, then I would be like, this is kind of weird. But to me, the real focus of it was him talking about his tenure with the Kings. And how he felt that team, like they didn't do much for him. I mean, I had 7 head coaches and like just the amount of turnover that the Kings had, and highlighting that fact and talking about his time with Denver. And it felt just like an all around piece on where he kind of was as a player. And something that he said before I get to the Kings part that interested me was he mentioned his play with the Clippers, where he said, I thought that time showed teams that I was okay with being a bench guy, that I'm okay with accepting the fact that I'm no longer going to give you 20 and 10 a night. I know that. Like, I thought I proved that. So for me to have to sit and wait for some phone calls was kind of shocking. So I wanted to bring that up because that was kind of an interesting point where he feels that he's done some rehab to his image, to his name, to, be considered for a bench role, because he understands, like, at this point, that's who I am. He has no qualms about that. But to the Kings part, I agree with him on that. And George Karl, of course, couldn't help himself. He had to also throw in some comments, bringing up the fact he's like, oh, what did the Kings? They just paid you $50 million and gave you a basketball career. And I've mentioned before on the show, I already got beef with George Karl because I still feel like, he's the catalyst that got Ray Allen out of Milwaukee. But George Karl also has a little bit of a sordid history with just some slick comments that don't need to be said at certain times. Talking about the Kings organization as a whole, Boogie didn't name George Karl, even though we know he doesn't like George Karl. He just meant, hey, the organization as a whole did not do me right. And if you look at the Kings in the last time they even made the playoffs, like, you can't, like, there's really no argument to say that organization is not ran properly. So for George Karl to come out and bring up the fact that he's gotten paid $50 million, it's not like he was charity. Like, he earned that money. He was a top player at that time. If the Kings weren't paying him $50 million, someone else would have. So it felt kind of high and mighty of George Karl to me to come in and be like, oh, what do you mean? We paid you $50 million. And any chance I get to kind of dunk on George Karl a little bit, I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it.
Well, you're not alone in feeling that way. So, and to your point that, the timing of when the Bucks released him, whatever. I mean, typically in this scenario, there's 2 sides to the story. And of course, if that was the case, and this goes for not a player with his status and his reputation, but any player, I mean, that sucks. And you would like to think that it could be handled a little more sensitively, I guess, when you're talking about someone's career and move into a city and all these things that go on that we often forget with players who have to go through a lot to get there. I guess my point would be, when he does talk about his image and coming back and being happy with being a role player and all those things, you kind of, if you come out then and have this article, then it's like, I don't think, I just don't think. And then, hours after that, he gets ejected in game 1. In game 2, he's fighting with a teammate. To me, I just don't. When you put it all together, it's one of the questions we had when the Bucks didn't keep him around. We're like, well, he's been like semi-productive. Do you think he could play in the playoffs? Probably not. We understand they probably wanted the Brook Lopez insurance, and they got Ibaka, who they were probably more comfortable with defensively rather than Boogie Cousins. So I understand all that. But the one part that we didn't know looking from the outside is, how is he really in the locker room? How is he really with these guys? And how is he really understanding that his minutes are going to be very, very minimal? So, I mean, I said it when he was here. I hope that he can play, because the one thing you can tell when you watch him is that he desperately wants to play and he desperately wants to be healthy and do some of the things that he used to be able to do. I just don't know. I don't know if that's the best way to sell yourself to teams that are going to eventually, someone's going to, have to sign him this offseason. And maybe after the way things have gone in the playoffs, it won't be Denver. So it's like, if you come out and all this stuff happens, it just didn't seem like a good decision for him personally, even though it's fascinating to get these insights to the players. I'm just not sure it was the best personal move for him moving forward.
Yeah, that's the tough part, where it's like, you enjoy getting the information, but then it's kind of like, at what cost does it come at? And that's the thing with like reputations. Like, it takes so long to build a good reputation, and in a moment you can lose it. So even if Boogie has been an upstanding, teammate, citizen over the last couple of years, he has to fight against the reputation that he's earned throughout his time in the league. So it's tricky in those situations. And like I said, when we had Boogie, I enjoyed having him here. I thought he was fun. His interviews, he was always very honest and personable, which we saw in this interview. I hope that doesn't bite him in the butt. I wish him well, and maybe him being back with Coach Malone, because they had good chemistry when he was in Sacramento. You notice how Malone didn't take any offense to the fact that he mentioned that you know what? Never mind, not going back to George Karl, but maybe something, you know, he has something there with Malone, or he's just at a point in his career where he's like, I'm just going to be honest. Like I've made so much money. I know it's going to be taken away from me at any time. I'm just going to be true to myself and keep it 100.
I've always liked Boogie Cousins, much like, and partly for that reason that he won't hold anything back, for better or worse, for himself. I appreciate the fact that he just comes out and talks. Same as I do Kevin Durant as well. I find him like such a fascinating character. So I wish him well. I totally understand why it didn't work out in Milwaukee, but just interesting little tie into the Bucks and his short time here as well, which is obviously a fascinating period in this year's regular season. 8:30 tip-off is a little bit late. You better, I don't know, what the coffee, sleep in the morning if that's possible. It's a work day, probably not. Get yourself ready for this one, Camille.
Oh yeah, it's going to be a post-work nap. You know, gotta make sure I'm ready to go for the game. But no, once the game starts, normally what happens is like, oh, I'm so tired. I can't have to wait so long for this game to start. And then like, I'm going to take a nap. Then as I'm laying there, I'm like getting excited to watch the game. So there's no nap. It's just like me laying there for a little while until I decide to continue watching basketball.
Speaking of a nap, I'm tired. And 11:30 a.m. for me, so I should be well and truly awake for this game. Make sure you check out the Locked On Now podcast and the Locked On NBA podcast. They got you covered for everything else happening around the NBA during these playoffs as they just get started. Camille, you rest that ankle. Everyone else, get yourself ready for this game too. Hopefully, the Bucks will head back to Chicago with 2-0 lead. But I'll be here with Frank for the post-game show, so make sure you check that out. And now for Camille and myself, take it easy. Speak to you guys after the game.